guys, what is up? My name is Megan. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. I hope you guys are doing well and staying safe, and welcome to today's video, which is a 5-star audit. Now this video was heavily inspired by the multitude of 5-star audits I've seen on BookTube. I thought this video concept was really interesting because it's essentially creators, readers, whatever you identify as, deep diving into the things that make books 5 stars for them, whether that be tropes, writing choices. There's like a multitude of things that you can discuss in a 5-star audit, and I thought it would be interesting to do this on my channel, one, so that you guys can really better understand what I look for in my books, like what is it that I seek out when I choose the books I read, but also that if you guys realize throughout my discussion that you have similar reading taste to me, or that you look for specific things, then you might be able to get more recommendations from me and see that we are like-minded people, or if we're totally off track. So I thought it would be helpful in that way as well, and just for you guys to better understand my reading taste. And yeah, some people do charts, some people do things. I'm just going to have a nice chat with you guys, give you some examples of books when I'm talking about specific things I'm looking for into my books. And yeah, without further ado, let's just hop on in. I feel like this might be a longer video, so don't forget to grab a snack, grab a drink, and let's talk about this. Now, the first thing that comes to mind to me when we talk about a 5-star book, like something that immediately will make me think this is it, like this has the potential to be a 5-star, is the amount of perspectives in a book. Now, I don't mind reading about a single perspective within a novel. However, my sweet spot, my ideal, is a dual perspective. Now, this might be the case because what I read is mostly romance, and I think it is very beneficial to get the perspective of both love interests, and to me it creates more tension, more pining, it's sweeter, it's a better time. But I also just think that it creates a better understanding of the situation as a whole when you have multiple perspectives, and that can be in romance, but it's also something I really enjoy in fantasy books as well, and even in thrillers sometimes. However, as I said, it's not a big deal, but I just immediately feel more connected to the characters when I can be inside their heads, and so having the option of having multiple POVs is always something I prefer. I gravitate towards romance books with multiple perspectives because to me it just, the link you have to a character when you can be inside their head is much more satisfying, and especially in those kind of situations where, you know, for example, one character thinks the other character hates them, and then you get into the second character's point of view and they have been secretly in love with them for like the past 5 years, and they're pining and saying all these wonderful things about our character, and you're like, oh my god, like this is the energy I want, and I feel like you don't get that in a single POV. So throughout the years, I have been making it a point of looking at my romance books before I purchase them, and usually I gravitate towards a dual perspective, and I feel like a lot of indie published romances do that. It is much more rare for traditionally published books, specifically in romance, to include multiple point of views, which is unfortunate, but yeah, I just think that it creates such a better character dynamic, and it just makes everything more lovable, and so you root for your characters. Now, I have like 2 things that really come to mind that I feel like do this very well in romance books, so I wanted to share them with you. One of them is Sunny Disposition by Deanna Gray. This is a dual perspective hockey romance, and this also has the anonymous trope, so you know that both characters know each other but they don't know it, and so having both their perspectives makes the tension just that much better, and I feel like you can really understand the chemistry and the love and the relationship building throughout both their perspectives. So if you're looking for a hockey romance that is dual perspective, or if you want to try a dual perspective romance, if it's not something you usually read, I highly recommend Sunny Disposition. And another book I thought did it absolutely wonderfully is Not Pretending Anymore by Penelope Ward and Vi Keeland. Penelope Ward and Vi Keeland usually have dual perspectives in their books, especially their co-written books. This one is a roommates to lovers romance, and I think that if this book was not dual perspective, it would have completely lost track of what it was doing, because you would not have grasped how much these characters mean to each other if there weren't a dual perspective. So if you're looking for a roommates romance, this one is absolutely phenomenal, and I do feel like it's very much slept on. And yeah, those are two like great examples of romantic dual POVs that I have really enjoyed. Saying that, there are such things as too many. Now, I want to compare two books because I'm not a big fantasy girly, but two of the books I have been reading, one is Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson. Why was that so hard to say? And the other I'm currently reading is The Way of Kings. These are two high fantasy books. The Way of Kings has 4 main protagonists within this book that you follow, and frankly enough, this is my limit. You would have introduced one extra character and I would have DNF'd this book, because sometimes too many characters makes it so that it's very impersonal and you kind of get mixed up with it who is who, and I feel like Gardens of the Moon for me was that. There are like, I don't even know how many perspectives there are in this book, but it's honestly ridiculous, and so it makes it so every personal encounter you get with a character kind of becomes blurry and you don't really get attached to any of the characters, and for me this does a disservice to the book. You could have picked just a few characters to follow. You can change out throughout the books, but if a book follows like upwards of 5 people, to me that's too much. So it goes both ways. I think dual perspective is really the sweet zone. 2 to 4 is great, and then more than that, you lost me. Now, to go with that, I will say that I do enjoy first person point of view, or like following one person if the book is written in first person. I do not do third person point of view. I think the only time I enjoyed a book that did that was Red, White, and Royal Blue, and it took me a long time to get into it, so immediately if it's in second or third person, you've lost me. However, like I mentioned, even though just following one perspective is not my favorite, I can definitely get behind following just one protagonist throughout a book if it's written in first person. And I think someone who does first person really well in romance that doesn't necessarily do multiple POVs is Ali Hazelwood, specifically with Love Theoretically. I do think this is her strongest book to date. She just does it so well in the sense that like you very much understand your character, you feel the same feelings they do because of the first person writing style, and it's just, it really sinks you in and you feel like you and the main character are like sharing a head while you're reading this, and so everything that happens to the main character feels like it's happening to you. And I think that's really the power of a first person point of view, where you're not just observing a scene, you're really within it. And I think Ali Hazelwood does first person writing amazingly, and she really strikes a chord. And even though we don't get the male protagonist POVs in her books, I still feel like you understand what they're feeling, and it's easy enough to decipher. So Ali Hazelwood is a queen for me of like first person single POV. Another thing that's really important for me in books is a likable narrator. I think the only exception to me liking a dislikable character, like enjoying a book with a dislikable main character, was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, because that was the entire purpose of it, and I could get behind it because of the writing and other strong choices the author made. However, dislikable narrators or unreliable narrators for me lose me completely, and so I really love when I can connect to a character. Usually I really connect with a character when they have similar personality traits as I do, or I can get behind their moral standpoint or core values. I think that for me it's really important, and I really enjoy reading about books which I can connect with. That's not to say that the main characters need to look or think like me at all times. I do love reading about different cultures and own voices novels because they are so enriching, but usually I still enjoy those characters and I enjoy what they're doing. Sometimes they will make dumb mistakes, but to their core they are good people with good intentions, even if sometimes they screw up. I just hate reading about unreliable narrators, especially in thrillers where you cannot trust a thing they say, and it just gets very confusing. And to me, I will not care about a character or what happens to them if I don't like them, and therefore if you're unlikable, you can die and I won't care, and so the purpose of the book is kind of lost on me. And you know, sometimes characters are meant to be lovable and I just don't love them because I don't jive with the way they think, and that really impacts the book for me because I'm a character girly through and through. A book could have no plot, just fantastic characters, and I would read it and give it 5 stars. But a book can have all plot and no characters, and it's going to be a 1 or 2 star book for me. That is just the way it is. If I don't care for you, I don't care what you're trying to do, and therefore I don't care about the story at all. However, I will say I'm not that hard to please. I do enjoy most characters because I get along with most people, so you know, that works. Next, I want to talk about book pacing, because I think that pacing in a book makes a very big difference, and clearly by my reading trends, which you can hear about more in my quarterly wrap-ups, I do talk about those and all the stats. I am a medium to fast-paced book girl. I do like most romance books, YA contemporaries, thrillers, middle grade books, most of them have a faster pace. So I like going through a book and like stuff is happening. We're not dwelling on details and long character descriptions or long descriptions of setting. I don't really care for those things because I'm not that much of a visual reader, and so that's why I struggle with fantasy at times, because I feel like we describe this mountain and it can take like 10 pages for us to understand what the mountain looks like, when I don't care. Like, I know there's a mountain and we can move on. And so I like books that are faster paced, where the plot keeps moving along and we're not dwelling on the details. I am not one to care for those details, and I just like when we're in action. I know a lot of people don't like war scenes or action scenes. They are my preferred thing in fantasy because something's happening, like something concretely is happening and we're getting through events, and that's the speed I like in my books. If a book is too slow or too lyrical or takes its time to describe too many things, you've lost me, and the thing is I won't want to pick up the book anymore, so it becomes a DNF. With that, I will say that my ideal page length is from like 300 to 500 pages. Anything over that, I really need to be invested. So for example, sometimes Mariana Zapata books are over 500 pages, but I'm invested in the relationship, and so I would read 1,000 pages just for the slow burn and just to get to our end game, and she does that very well. Some fantasy books are over 500 pages and I've read them and enjoyed them. I will not do a thriller that is over like 380 pages. If you go over 400 pages, you better have a reason, because it's not thrilling anymore because the pace is off. If you have a thriller that's so long, it's not a thriller anymore. Same with mystery books. I like them to be on the shorter end. And I feel like middle grades really hit the spot because there's usually between like 300 and 350, 60 pages. And that's like on the longer end. And so I think they do pacing incredibly well. And that's just kind of like what I enjoy. I feel like really big books often don't have a reason to be that big, and they just lose me. You know, it's not my personal fave. As for the moods of the books I read, most of the books I read are lighthearted and emotional at the same time. Now, I don't like a book that is just a sob fest. I won't read A Little Life, at least not willingly, because the purpose of me is not to like read a book and be emotionally damaged by it. I get why people do it. I think it's great. I am just not comfortable enough with going through those emotions within a book. I've had enough of these emotions outside of reading, and I really read to escape. And so I like lighthearted books. Like all the romance books I read are sweet, steamy books that are, you know, the third act breakup is not gonna like rip your heart out and not put it back in place. You know what you're getting into, and you know it's gonna be a happily ever after. So those are like my favorites. I also like emotional books in the sense that like I really like certain topics addressed in my book, specifically mental health, which I'll touch on afterwards. But like I like there to be meaning and discussions of themes, and those usually get me emotional. But as I said, there's a limit between being emotional and sobbing like a little baby, and I don't want to sob like a baby. that's where you're gonna lose me and lose some of the stars. And I also think that, like, for my fantasy and middle grade, I really like adventurous middle grade. I don't really read contemporary middle grade, which is very surprising because I'm a contemporary girly at heart, but middle grade is usually fantasy, and I like there to be adventures. I like going places, I like discovering things, I like magic schools, I like those kinds of things where there's like an adventure and there's a plot point and like we're moving forward, and I think that goes back to the pacing. And those are just my favorite types of books to read, where we're whisked off to a magical world and we go on this adventure with our character and we go in for a ride. It's kind of like watching a movie but reading it with your eyeballs, and those are just definitely my favorite kinds of books to read. Within my books, there are certain things I like to see and certain things I gravitate towards, and one of those things is strong friendship dynamics. I think that friendships are a very complex thing and they are very difficult to get in books, and I just love when we have a strong knit friends group. And I don't mean like 10-15 friends, I mean like a group of 3 or 4 friends. That is like the peak for me. Sometimes 5 or 6, like in the case of Emily Henry with Happy Place, for example. I think she did the friendship group really well, talking about the friend dynamics and how friendships kind of change over time, and I feel like that change was really well represented in Happy Place. So if you're looking for a book with a strong friendship dynamic and discussion, that is the book for you. But I just like, for example, in Skandar and the Unicorn Thief by A.F. Stedman, which is a middle grade book, we have this group of 4 friends. They meet, they create this strong bond, and then they're like very strongly knit together, and those things make me very happy. A lot of middle grade books have that kind of 3 or 4 friends. Morgan from the Nevermore series with her friends that she makes at school, she doesn't have a lot of them, but they're very strongly connected. That is a wonderful thing. Amari from Amari and the Night Brothers, and that one specific friend that she makes within that magical world. I feel like those are the best kinds of books to read. I also like them in my romances, where we get companion series and we get very strong friends, so we follow like each friend in a different book, and then over that period of, I don't know, 4 to 6 books, you get to read about those friendships and how they grow throughout what they go through with the different books. It's one of my favorite things. As for themes I really like in books, I feel like they very much represent me to my core. I have my bachelor's in social work, and I usually gravitate towards topics that appeal to a social worker within my books. One of them is mental health. I think that mental health discussions, whether that be in a fantasy world or a contemporary world, they are so important to put in books because it normalizes mental health, and I think that some books do it incredibly well, and it is very enriching to have those conversations, whether that be like in a middle grade or young adult. I think mental health has its place in all books to me, because it is something that happens to a lot of people and I think people have to cope with, and I really like reading about it. It's very important to me and I really enjoy it when it's well done. Sometimes it's not well done, that becomes problematic. We also have been getting more books about transitional periods, and to me this is one of the most important things because it's something I have struggled with within my own lifetime. The transition specifically from high school to college and from college to your adult life. I think that some books and authors who do that very well is Nina Moreno, specifically with Our Way Back to Always, as well as a newer book I read, which is Ruby Ramos' Recipe for Success by Jessica Parra. Both of them are basically stories about characters that are leaving high school to go to college, but they also have pressures from their parents and society and themselves, and it's just the discussions on how it feels to go from a comfort situation that is high school and then moving into bigger things, and having people kind of influence your choices, to me is something that needs to be talked about because it is kind of like a universal experience, and I feel like most people have this kind of transitional period and not everybody copes with it well, so it's nice to have it represented in books. And another thing I really enjoy seeing in books is substance abuse. Now, I know this can be a trigger for some people, however, I think that if it's well done, it can really add to a conversation. Now, I'm not saying to use substance abuse or mental health as plot devices. I will always and forever be against using those things as a plot device. However, sometimes it can be part of a character's identity and a topic that is touched on. For example, the Starstruck, I think that's what it's called, series by Susanna Nix does this really well. They are rock star romances that touch upon mental health and substance abuse, and the discussions on substance abuse and the help and every resource that is available and all those things are very well done in those books, and I think it can add so much depth to a book, and I love seeing it. And I've given a lot of books that have these topics 5 stars for sure. I wanted to talk about a few of the tropes I like in books. So for romance books, the single parent, roommates, friends to lovers, fake dating, celebrity, and anonymous identity, like / you've got mail vibes, are my go-to. They are some of my favorite. If you mix that in with dual perspective, you're a winner. Like, unless your writing is absolute trash, you're gonna get like a 4 or 5 stars out of me, because you're just hitting everything I enjoy in a book. Because I feel like these tropes add so much like chemistry and tension and angst to books, and they just make for the loveliest scenes and just the steamiest times, and for me it's so enjoyable. I think if I had to pick like 3, see, I love all of them, but I feel like I would gravitate towards anonymous identity, roommates, and single parent as like my core 3. If you have these tropes, I will be obsessed with you. And for like middle grade, because I feel like my reading for middle grade is much different than like literary fiction or romance or thrillers, I really enjoy animal companions. Chosen one trope, which I feel like half at least of the middle grade I read is a chosen one trope. Like the whimsical vibes, like Nevermore, Amari, Skandar, they all have very whimsical vibes, and I just eat that up. The friends group, as I said, I really like strong knit friend groups, so like those chosen one children with their friends, I love that. And surprisingly, I do love like just following one protagonist when it comes to middle grade books. I think that they are usually well done. It's very adventurous and very fast paced, so I don't mind just having that one perspective. I also think that I really love retellings in my books, that whether that be like in a fantasy book, a romance book, whatever it is. For example, A Curse of Dark and Lonely is a retelling. I loved that fantasy book. It also has disability representation, which is another thing I feel like I should add to my list. Physical and mental disabilities are very important to be in fiction, and I really enjoy books that do have that. Another one of my favorite books is The Thing About Feathers, and that book is very underhyped, and our main character has epilepsy, and I think that is super great. And also Love Theoretically, your main character has diabetes, type 1 diabetes, which, as I've said many times, I think is extremely important to see in books. So retellings and anything to do with disability are also things that I really enjoy. And just to wrap it up, I think that I've mentioned this previously, but I don't like flowery or complex writing. I do love me a good quote, but I don't like obnoxious writing. I don't like it to be like too overly descriptive or flowery, or compare like her eyes were as brown as a coffee, you know what I mean? Like, I don't like that shit. Like, to me, it takes me out of the book, and I will not jive with it. And most of the authors who I know have flowery writing, I have either DNF'd their books or just completely stayed away, because I don't read things that I'm not sure I'm going to enjoy. So yeah, those are basically all the things I look for in a book, and when I look at the books I've given 5 stars, this is essentially what they hit. And yeah, that's about it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you very soon. Bye guys, happy reading.